This meeting is being recorded.
So, now that you've all been duly advised,
And also with
Jessica,
you.
welcome. Tell us
Thank
about
you.
your work.
Yeah, so I am Jessica Maudlin, and I'm the Associate for Sustainable Living and Earth Care Concerns with the Presbyterian Hunger Program. For those of you who might not know, that piece of the work is part of the hunger program because of the ways in which we were seeing that so much we couldn't do hunger work without looking at the climate change and other environmental impacts. So that's part of why that work is housed there. Folks that have been around the denomination a long time know that there have been points where there's been an environmental ministries office, and just because that title isn't out there, the work is still being done. And actually, with Matthew 25 becoming a foci for the church, there's more environmental and climate change work happening, I think more intentionally than ever before in the denomination. So I apologize for the gravelly voice. It is allergy season here in Southern Indiana where I live. But it sounds like at least Ann and Richard are familiar with the Earth Care Congregation program. Are the other people on the call, are you hoping to learn? Can I see like a wave maybe if that's you, or you already know more about it? Okay. Well, this year, there were 305 churches certified. So with the number of Presbyterian churches is just under 9,000 is the official number that we have. So about 3.5% of PCUSA churches have done this certification process. And every year, even through COVID, we have seen like 20 to 30% growth in the number of churches. So it's definitely something that people care a lot about. You may or may not know that the way that the process works is that churches who are interested in this form a green team. Their sessions approve the Earth Care Pledge, which commits folks to doing work in 4 categories. That's worship, outreach, education, and their facilities. And you get 100 points in doing each work in each of those 4 categories, and then that certifies you as an Earth Care congregation. As I'm the main contact for that, but I also help connect Earth Care churches to a variety of offices within the mission agency. I convene the staff roundtable of different offices that are doing climate change and environmentally related work. And then also I connect to Presbyterian affiliated groups that are outside the scope of the mission agency. So groups like Presbyterians for Earth Care, Presbyterians for Carbon Dividends Now, a little bit the Peacemaking Fellowship, Fossil Free Peace USA, and some other groups like that. So it's been, even through COVID, it's been amazing to get to work with congregations who are so committed in doing work in each of those areas. The creativity that comes with having to do things a little differently than we'd planned has been really encouraging to me personally. And I think it's a great testament to how important environmental and climate change work is. As a program, we also create and offer and connect churches to resources around different environmental topics, things that help people kind of visually look at the connections between climate change and food, climate change and water, climate change and disaster. I am also the person on staff who is the kind of the head of the delegation to the UN COP gatherings every year. So this past year, I got to be part of the group that represented the PCUSA denomination in Egypt at the climate change talks. For those of you who may not know, the PCUSA is part of a larger interfaith group called ACT Alliance that they do work all over the world. And they have a very big presence planning different actions and webinars and educational gatherings at events like the United Nations event. I also help resource the General Assembly Environmental Justice Committee, which in 2023 had a lot of big work that they undertook during that time. You may or may or may not be familiar with that. The folks with Presbyterians for Carbon Dividend did a great job of putting together kind of an overview of here's all of the things that happened that I'd be happy to share with you if any of you are interested in that. The biggest piece of that was the divesting from the 5 fossil fuel groups. I put in the chat, but maybe since other folks have joined, I kind of thought this group would be folks who were interested in maybe learning more about the certification program, but it seems like maybe some of you are already familiar or part of churches that are already certified. But if you are interested in learning more about the details of the certification piece, this is a full-length webinar. Lifts up how the program got started in 2009. Jane Laping, who was a longtime part of Presbyterians for Earth Care, and she's still involved with them, but it was kind of her brainchild that she worked with the person on staff to create the audit that you're familiar with for the first group of 10 churches in 2010. And so from there, we've grown to the 305 certified for this year. So I'm not sure if there were more specific things, quite like maybe if there are things that you wanted to know from me that I could, we could chat a little bit. I could tell you some stories of some things churches are doing if that's helpful, or answer any questions that you have, or
I'd like to hear what congregations are doing.
Yeah, tell us stories.
yeah.
We love stories.
You all are terrific. That's what I'll say. I'm going to, I have this one little, that I might share my screen if I have the capability to do that, just so that we all love a good photo, right? So can you all see that?
Oh, there we go.
Okay. So, so in each of these 4 categories that I named, so the worship, outreach, education, and facilities, some of the stories just blow me away about the creativity and the passion that I get to see. The butterfly here in the middle is from a church, Berwyn Presbyterian in Pennsylvania. They had a lot of, they had a very nice, well manicured space around their building, and they decided a few years ago that they wanted to make it be more natural habitat, and they wanted to install a rain garden and do all of these things. And they realized that as they were researching and figuring these things out, that if they had those questions, other people probably did as well. So they kept track and took notes as they were working, and created a how-to guide. It's called Nature That Nurtures, for churches that are going through a similar process of how you can turn your landscape into something that's better for the environment and not just visually appealing. The photo in the upper corner here is actually this is Mark Aiken, and this is, a lot of churches we're seeing are becoming electric vehicle charging stations and also doing events. There's a church in Scottsburg that they are in a more rural community, and they hosted a see and interact with electric vehicle event for that community, so that folks could learn more about the benefit of electric vehicles, but then also just experience them, because so many folks had not really had an encounter with that. We see lots of amazing creativity that allows this kind of intergenerational learning together. Stillwater, I think it's First Presbyterian in Stillwater, Oklahoma. This is from their, they did a VBS that they took a little bit of a different approach to. Instead of doing a week for kids in the evening, they took a month in the summertime and did their VBS on Sundays after church, and it was open to all ages. And so their theme was all God's creatures. And so folks got to learn together across ages and families about nature and how we can care for nature and the role of us all being part of God's creation. This picture in the center here is from Asheville Presbyterian in Asheville, North Carolina, and they have really been intentional about decreasing all kinds of waste coming out of their facility, but then also showing folks what is possible in becoming as close to zero waste as possible. And so they community garden, they recycle, they use reusable dishes and things at their fellowship meal, they compost, they do all of these things. And this is from a fellowship meal. This actually happened just before COVID started, that they had a fellowship meal of their congregation that was about 100 people. And because of the plans and the things that they've been doing to commit to being as little waste as possible, this one little plate of trash was their whole, all the waste that had to be thrown away after their fellowship meal. So they were all really, worked together to make sure nobody brought any of their food in throwaway containers. They had folks doing, signed up for the dishes brigade afterwards and all of that. So I just love this story because it's like, it's what is possible, right? Like we think, oh, we're going to have trash, but if you're composting and only taking the little bit to begin with, if maybe you're not going to finish the whole thing there. So that's a great story of that. And this past summer, I actually got to spend most of June and July with middle schoolers at Massanutten Springs camp, doing environmentally focused workshops. And there was a kid from this congregation. And when I started telling them this story, he said, "Oh, I remember that. I was there." Like I was a little kid, but I remember that. And we talk about this. And so he was really excited that that's something that anybody else would care about. But I love that story. This photograph is from Spencer Presbyterian Church in Spencer, West Virginia. This congregation has had 7 members at this time, and they really wanted to put solar panels on their building. And they worked with the investment and loan program and were able to get a restoring creation loan for them, and they were able to install these solar panels, and they make more electricity than they use, and they were able to sell that back to the electric company.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and particularly in West Virginia, where coal is so important, and to see them commit to wanting to do this. One of the other stories that came out of that is that just up the road from there in Glenville, West Virginia, there was a 20-member congregation who had been wrestling with this idea of installing solar panels, and they had not done it because they decided that they were too small of a congregation to install solar panels. So after getting to go to the dedication for the ones on this building, they too then went back and regrouped, and they also installed installed a solar panel array on their congregation. This is a little bit sad, but one of the things about this that just sticks with me so much is that there was one particular woman who was really committed to making this happen, and her dedication impacted this other congregation. But she passed away not long after that second church got their solar panels installed. But like her commitment to that is something that has benefited both of these congregations and will for a long time to come. So it's just a beautiful story of how we do have impact that lasts beyond what's happening right now. And this photograph is from this is Hillsborough Presbyterian Church in North Carolina. And this is the woman that is the head of their green team there. And she sent me this photograph of their grounds team had been a group of volunteers. And when it was time to replace their equipment, their green team had done had done a lot of research and made these recommendations about we'd like to have these electric options purchased, and it, helps decrease, helps with the sound pollution, helps with the air pollution. But the thing that they found was that making the choices to purchase these electric options, they were lightweight and easier, so not being as heavy and being easier to use. They found that it changed the demographic of the makeup of their volunteer team. So some folks who wanted to be involved in ways, but maybe, she said they had some older folks in their congregation that some of the other equipment, it just wasn't safe for them to use, but this made it possible for them to do so. And she also said it changed the gender makeup of the volunteer team, because she said, I get out there in my heels and my pearls with the leaf blower, and we'll do that Sunday morning. She said, I never would have had that old diesel thing out there in my church clothes. But the other part of that is, so because more members of that congregation got involved with doing that, it also meant that year for Christmas, several families got new electric lawn care equipment. So it was a change made in the equipment of the church, but it also, it's a direct connection to how that changes for, members of the congregation also made some changes. So those are just a couple of quick stories that are some of the ones that bring me a lot of joy. Yeah, Karen.
Hi, I apologize for being late. When I went to go on, they decided to update my Zoom, and then they wanted a password, which was in a different room. And so I apologize for that. Is there a place where we can go to get these stories to share?
So our blogs, periodically I write about them and I feature them. One of the things that I have on my list that I'm hoping to do is to kind of turn them into more minute for mission type things. Several of these stories that I've shared, though, I have already written posts on our blog about. And
okay.
So, Karen, I think that I have your email address. So you're the Earth Care contact.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd be happy to send you a couple of the slides that I put together that I have links to the specific story, so you could use the photo in the story.
Okay.
I'd be happy to do that. And I've just finished with the reading, in March, reading all of the applications for this year. And so I'm working on putting some updated stories together too. So hopefully we'll have some new stuff. There's a church in Delaware that they were looking to grow their Adopt a Highway program. And so their green team served as the ushers for one Sunday and wore the orange vests and the hard hat and the, all of that sort of thing. And she said that last year was the biggest group of people that they ever had sign up, because they had done this, like, introduce the Adopt a Highway program, wearing all of that, and it got enough attention that they were able to have more space because they had a bigger team commit to that. So there's some great stories from last year too that I'm hoping to get to share.
Great. And can I ask one other question? It's 10 years for us. So has your original survey, which we did 10 years ago, is that pretty much the same?
There are a few things that we have added or changed. I know this past year I added a couple of questions about what kind of advocacy folks were doing.
Okay.
It's largely the same. One of the things that we have chosen to do is that if folks, once they've done that for 5 years, you can submit a narrative report, so you don't have to do the full audit. And then once you've been certified for 10 years, you can do an audit, or you can just tell me, yes, we're still committed and we want to be counted. We've kind of found that once folks hit that 5-year mark, it's good for them to have that 5 years of data to see where they've come. But then after that, like, either folks have the congregation is bought in or it's not. And so if folks
Right.
are,
Right.
and the narratives are so much fun for me to read. But also it's much easier to talk about the impact of the program when I have stories. So the 5 years of data is really good for helping people track and kind of keep them on focus. But as you know, we've had to grow with the program. So when we hit that first batch of 10-year churches, it was like, okay, well, how can we do this, to make it more inclusive and helpful for the churches that are applying to?
Thank you.
Jessica, how would you help a presbytery become an earth care presbytery, or how might that be defined?
So Presbyterians for Earth Care, so my office is me, and the Earth Care congregation certification is like one piece of the work that I do. And I worked with Presbyterians for Earth Care to develop a toolkit that they did a lot of the work on for here's how you form a presbytery-wide green team. I've also worked with presbyteries who have said, we as a presbytery affirm this 4-part pledge. And then I've worked with them to develop like green meeting policies or green purchasing policies for things that they need. But we don't at this point offer a certification the same way that we do for congregations. So we have tools for presbyteries that want to do that and want to be more organized, but we don't have a specific certification. We've talked about if that's something that there's a need for, and haven't landed on anything specific just yet. But I do, the toolkit is a really great resource for organizing. And I'm happy to meet with presbyteries to help them develop their own policies and talk with them about how could the Earth Care Pledge be a helpful tool.
Okay. Since I will be the incoming moderator for Utica, can you send that toolkit to Larry? But also, Larry, can you give Jessica my address?
I've got it. In fact, I've got the toolkit right now, so I will send it to everyone.
Great.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
And I can put my email address here if I'm not already in contact.
I've got it, Jessica. I'll send it to everyone. So.
Okay, yeah. And
Thank you.
I'm happy to have one-on-one conversations, happy to circle back with, with individual congregations are interested in pursuing this and would like a conversation or a presentation. Sometimes I find folks are, there's 1 or 2 people in a church that they're interested in this, and then it takes a little more to get the session on board. But once I have a conversation with them, they're like, oh, we're already doing these things often. So
I'm curious, Jessica, do you have any stories about how local congregations tell the surrounding community that they are Earth Care congregations?
Yeah. So there's lots of ways. We have found particularly churches that end up installing solar panels or some other, end up redoing the grounds or install these charging stations. Like those are a great visual indicator of that they care about something different. One of the things that I do is send a press release so that folks can use that either on social media or in local media. And then also just kind of developing some of those, the church in Stillwater, they reached out to their local news channel even during COVID, and they used our sustainable palms from Palm Sunday, but they did had families drive through. And so they put out their Earth Care banner that they had made using the logo that we provide that you can print, on those vinyl banners. And just talking about that they is also a really helpful thing. There's a church in Minnesota that around Earth Day, they coordinate with other churches in the community to host, they have lots of property. So they host a recycling fair and like an electronic and medications recycling stations over that weekend. Folks also, I've heard lots of great stories about people doing animal and pet blessings outdoors. along with some signage and stuff in their bulletins about part of why we're doing this is because we are a congregation that cares about this. And we had one story of a church that they were in close proximity. Their church building was in close proximity to a public park. And so they moved across the street to the public park to do their annual pet blessing. And a woman from up the street happened to be walking by with her dog. They blessed the dog. And then later that week, there was a death in her family, and she came to the congregation for kind of that emotional support, because she was like, if you care about my dog, you definitely care about my son. And so,
Nice.
yeah, so there are lots of great stories of pet blessings becoming, ways that draw families in and that kind of thing. So does that answer the question?
Sure.
Oh, I think you're still muted.
There you go.
We started out a number of years ago. At the beginning, primarily, it was over the issue of fracking for gas in New York State, and it was public advocacy, in this case, against fracking, and that was resolved at the state level politically. And then we moved into what can we do to limit our carbon footprint. So Karen's husband is head of our buildings and grounds. So we had an inside track to that, and we insulated many of our buildings to reduce the consumption of fuel oil. In the Northeast, heating is a issue in many old buildings and so forth. So insulation was big. We are, I guess, stuck with oil furnaces, but we replaced all of our oil furnaces with much more efficient furnaces. So we had 4. So, it was it took 4 years to go through that, but it has made a substantial savings in the amount of heating oil, and especially this year when it went up to $4 a gallon, it saved us a lot of money. We also replaced windows with thermopane, double glass windows. So we went through a lot of that. We went through recycling was big, and cardboard, paper, and so we basically went through all. This was all documented in over the first 5-10 years. And the last thing we got to was our church being an historic building and so forth. There was the roof the way it was. We were reluctant to put solar panels on our roof. We thought of it, but we decided to go with what's called community solar. In New York State, you can purchase your electricity from other providers, not the guys who own the wires. And so we have a combination of solar, which is generated mainly in the summer months from longer days. But when those credits run out, we are then using hydro and biogas, and I think nuclear is maybe in that. Wind, mainly wind. No, the wind and hydro. So, we basically have done as much as we can to conserve energy.
Mm-hmm.
But so I'm thinking, maybe are we going to be in the future shifting back to public advocacy? Okay, in other words, the world is still going to burn up and etc. And it's nice to take care of your churches and save money and have little demonstrations and this and that, but that's not going to save the world really, unless we get a whole lot, public policy gets more active and so forth. Now, New York is not a problem, but totally a problem. But the public advocacy issues then present us with predicaments. And now we see with this community solar, a lot of the environmental people and the organizations, nonprofits, are opposing solar farms, okay? Because it disrupts agricultural land, good fields and so forth. So there's now a growing conflict in New York State, upstate New York, because we don't want solar farms ruining our countryside and destroying the ag land, which we're going to need to send electricity to New York City. You see, I mean, becomes a real conflict. And how do you navigate a church through this? Because you can see both sides of the story. How do you come up with a policy or an advocacy that can balance these issues off? The other one that I have always been concerned with, because at the initial stages of moving to non-fossil fuels, was the higher cost. Now, solar has come down dramatically and other things have happened. But if you switch to electricity, but if the electricity is going to be more expensive because of it's going to be using what have you, so many poor people, for lack of a better word, but live in trailers and they only have electricity, and you're going to be placing a higher burden on poor folk with higher utility bills. And I've never heard of Jesus Christ ever saying, put burdens on the poor. We're supposed to be taking burdens off the poor. So how does the church advocate for something that could raise electricity prices because it's good for the planet, but in the short term, it presents a hardship on lower income people of all kinds. So where is the advice on this that, really this is the issue the church needs, in my view, to address, because you can't just be doing one thing and the consequences over here and ignoring the unintended terrible consequences over there. We would look like fools to the rest of the world if we do this sort of stuff. So give us some guidance, please.
Well, I think that you have articulated very well that it is complicated and there isn't always a one answer. And that's part of why I love working with this program, is because I know that the heart to care for the environment and to care for people, that's something we can hold in common. But what that looks like in New York is maybe going to be a little different than what it looks like in Indiana or in California or in the Dakotas. And a thing that I talk with people, two things. One, it's mindfulness of we are in this together and what is the best choice that we can make for the most amount of people where we are. And the other piece of that is, when we talk about some of this advocacy stuff, we make sure that we're talking about just transition being part of that conversation, right? And even that can be loaded for folks because it may not mean the same thing to me that it means to someone in coal country in West Virginia. But I think some of those, the policies that guide my work of, making sure that we are paying attention to the things that you're talking about, like what is the cost of this going to be for, folks on the margins, folks in, with less income and less resources. I think a lot about, when we talk about climate change negotiations and like what helps, they have a simulator that helps people understand that. And so where do people need to give? And the answer is it has to come from everywhere, right? That's why it's not one thing that is the solution. It's all of these things. And, this same question, my middle schoolers from this past summer were asking that same question. Like, I don't understand if I'm supposed to be using less electricity, but you're saying electric vehicles are better, but that's going to take electricity to, so it's a complicated conversation, and I don't have all of the answers. But the example that I kind of tried to use with them is like, you know, when COVID became a thing, we couldn't use a shared communion cup necessarily, right? Because we also needed to factor in the health of people. And so we saw some of these churches go back to using individual cups for communion service. But there's a way to even do that that's more more environmentally friendly than single-use plastic that's being thrown away. So I unfortunately don't have all of the answers, but I do know that the part of why this program is so great is because there is a place for everyone to come into the conversation, and advocacy is definitely an important piece of it, and making sure that the right people are at the tables with the conversations to be happening. So it's not all people that are only, it's not people that have my issues at the table. It's that we're all here and we all have a voice, and the solution has to come from all of these angles. So I don't have a specific answer, but I think you are definitely asking the right questions. And I think that's an important piece of the puzzle.
One thing that I think that everybody can realize pretty soon is that if we don't do what we can do to address climate change, the economic downside is going to be felt by all of us. It'll be felt by the poor even the most, but it will be felt by all of us. New York City is looking at rising tides. If they get to a certain point, there'll be a lot of people that will have to move. They'll probably have to move to upstate New York. So we might not have farmland because we may have people that have to move here. So, I mean, all of these things have something that's down the road. But I think for me, what I've tried to do in my church is to present things that we could have a conversation about, and more awareness maybe about what the problems are. And then give people the things that they can do in their backyard or in their home, or changes that they can make so that they can at least feel like they are trying. And that, I think, is very important in a time that is so fraught with bad news.
I like the fact, Jessica, that you're bringing in all people need to be
At the table.
Because we are coming out of different areas. And I think some of Wendell Berry's work in particular, but just have been reading his most recent book, brings that really focused on particularly rural areas. So when I've seen some of the mission blogs in the daily mission guide and see that they're from rural areas, I think this is terrific, that we don't all have to have solar panels. We all need to be working on decreasing our use of all forms of energy, and particularly things that are going to be huge corporate entities. So doing things as individuals or within our small communities is a big plus. And advocating for something like that, rather than assuming that corporations are going to really have the middle class, much less people on low incomes, in mind.
Speaking of inclusion of all groups, I think I have a question for you, Jessica, about that. When we first when Karen first started our environmental stewardship program in Cooperstown, I think all of us had anticipated that this would be a program that would attract a lot of the younger families, not just the kids, but the young parents and young adults in the congregation. And what we have found is that it has been mostly the older people in the congregation who have been able to be involved. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this, but my question for you is, have you seen in the Earth Care congregations around the country, have you seen a lot of involvement of younger people, or is it mostly the older people who are trying to
Save the planet.
to do this?
No. I will say that there has definitely been a mix and a spectrum. So even with our Earth Care congregations, some of those churches are certified because there's a great story from Lexington, Kentucky, that they had a 5th grade Sunday school class basically say, in the sermon, you told us XYZ, why aren't we doing that here? And so that Sunday school teacher started researching to see, are there resources out there to address those things, and came across the certification. And that Sunday school class became the green team, went to the session, and got the church on board. There are a couple of other churches that the green team is the youth group. They're, like what the demographic and makeup of churches looks like right now, like, the PCUSA is an older denomination. And so it makes sense that some churches are seeing, oh, well, the people that are involved are this, this demographic. But, so I think it's something that there's an interesting mix, because I think the thing, I came into this work in my late 20s and realizing, some of these things that I kind of thought were, well, my generation cares about them more, had to learn there are folks that have been doing this work, way longer than I ever even knew things were an issue, and just realizing that this is something that does take the whole table, right? And so I think there are some churches that are seeing, yes, this program is bringing in families. Yes, it is bringing in youth. Yes, it is appealing to this younger demographic. And some churches maybe aren't seeing that as much, but that is an interesting piece, where then those congregations that are just older congregations, like, you have a real opportunity to connect to your school systems or your community gardens or that kind of thing of like, this isn't, maybe it's not bringing people in, but because you are people that care and have this information and maybe have resources in terms of people power, that there are other connections in the community that can be made. So that's something I'm seeing other churches that have that kind of feedback you just offered about. We thought this might bring in younger folks, but it's just us. Like, it's that same thing. There's some things that are not true across the board. And so, again, part of why I think this program works so well is that it is set up so that it can be successful in a lot of, with things that look a lot different, if that makes sense. One of the things, there was a story, I can't remember where they're from, but they had a story of, they have an event where they collect used books that then they donate to do something else. But they had a congregation that they were wanting to make more connections with young people in their community. So they set up at that same collection event that they're known for, they had some members of their congregation that had some mechanical know-how, that they also advertised it as like let us help you get your bike back in shape situation. And so they had a lot of kids in the community that came to the church because they needed, their bicycle tire needed aired up, or they needed some oil in the chain or whatever. And so they kind of turned it into this like you don't need a new bike. This is a thing you can be fixed. So it's like helping, instill this wisdom of like, this thing can be refurbished, or, just a little thing. You don't have to throw it away and get a new thing. And you're people with, some time and some skill set to like inflate a tire or whatever. So that kind of thing, I think, even if they're not in your sanctuary on Sunday, that's a lot of Earth Care churches are connected to the community because they're being in the community, right? So.
Actually, Larry, I have a response to a question that you asked earlier. We have in Otsego County, we have an Earth Day festival, which, many communities are having these days. And one year, our church did actually have a table at the Earth Care Festival. And we had a big poster showing our church and all the different ways that we were an Earth Care church, and we engaged in conversations with people there. That was really great. We only did it that one year, and then I think COVID came, and that's what we're not doing it this year. But anyway, that was one good activity for spreading the word to other people and other churches, other communities.
But the good thing is, even if it's not being done as Cooperstown, First Presbyterian Church of Cooperstown, at the Earth Festival this weekend, Living Waters, which is, for the rest of you, one of the mission projects of the Cooperstown congregation, will be there and represented. So it takes it just even beyond our community into the world.
Yeah.
Jessica, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for sharing all this information. I've got your contact information, the toolkit, the video you shared, so I'll get that out to the group.
Yeah. Thank you for the invitation to be with you.
Blessings on your work.
You all too. And Betsy, if I can do anything as you move into your new role, please don't hesitate to contact me.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll be in contact.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Well,
Have a
let's
great day.
end with a Chinook blessing.
Yes.
We call upon the forests, the great trees reaching strongly to the sky with earth in their roots, the heavens in their branches, the fir and the pine and the cedar, and we ask them, teach us and show us the way. We call upon the creatures of the fields, and forests and the seas, our brothers and sisters, the wolves and deer, the eagle and dove, great whales and dolphin, the beautiful orca and salmon, who share our Northwest home. We ask them, teach us and show us the way. We call upon all those who have lived on this earth, our ancestors and our friends, who dreamed the best for future generations, and upon whose lives our lives are built. With thanksgiving, we call upon them to teach us and show us the way. And lastly, we call upon all that we hold most sacred, the presence and power of the great spirit of love and truth, which flows through all the universe, to be with us, to teach us, and show us the way. All right, friends, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Bye now.